we get this into something more tangible? Well, first thing, we can blend it with a word template, and you can set these up yourselves using about 180 different tokens with all of your branding and narrative and everything else, so that you can create essentially a high-level design document that the customer can easily read. We can see here, there's our HLD document. So it's telling us, first of all, what's been audited and what it is. So we can see it's a Mitel system, version numbers. It then gives us some insights. So it's saying here that there's 48 devices on this system. Of those, 40 of them are IP phones. So we're going to need to check the models to see which are supported by Cisco and BroadSoft. In fact, when we do a bulk export for migration, it will actually check those automatically. It tells us there's 12 mobility users, where a standard feature across the board, and so is call forwarding. There's 4 analog phones. We're going to require some sort of gateway for Cisco, BroadSoft, Microsoft, but they're not supported under Zoom. 4 digital phones are going in the bin regardless of where you go. Hunt groups are standard, pickup groups are standard except on Zoom, and PA intercom is a weirdness that's only supported by Cisco and BroadSoft. Continuing down, it gives us a look at the carbon impact of this existing phone system. And this is useful from a sales point of view. You know, what we're saying here is, if we take the notional view that every device in the PBX is being used for 30% of a 5-day working week, that equates to an average of 0.38 kilowatt hours. But once you extrapolate that out over the year, that equates to 1,700 kilograms of CO2, or chopping down over 3 fully grown trees, or even the entire energy usage of over a quarter of a domestic house. And the argument there is you can mitigate this by putting it on a cloud solution where you're in a highly efficient data center, shared tenancy on a platform, and that massively reduces your carbon impact. Or you could recycle 104 bags of paper, or plant 40 trees and leave them growing for 10 years, or even swap out 90 incandescent bulbs for LED ones. But you'd have to do that every single year just to mitigate the energy usage of this phone system. Continuing on down through the document, we've got things about the gateways, what sort of handsets are in use. It's telling us here, it's warned us, there's 16 analog extensions, but of which 4 are programmed. Now, remember those 4, so we'll come back to that. Giving us details about what numbers ranges are in use. You know, if you're going to something like Cisco HTS, your number ranges all need to be the same number of digits, otherwise it's going to get upset. But also, this is an opportunity to reconcile and rationalize DDI ranges. You know, if you've got DDI blocks associated with these numbers, and you've got a DDI block in the 5,000, 5XXX range, and you've only got one number in it, well, now would be the time to renumber that user and get rid of that DDI block that's costing you money. It gives us a breakdown of all the handsets. We saw before the detailed view of the handsets. Well, it's got a picture of every different type of handset and details of its functionality. Because, you know, if you're going from, say, Mitel to Cisco, you want to make sure that you've got the same sort of functionality for your users, and you don't want to be taking a nice shiny backlit color LCD phone off of the director's desk and then putting, a cheap base level SIP device on there. So understanding what they've got at the moment so you can provide them with similar functionality. It gives you details of call forwarding that's routed onwards to speed dials. I mean, I'm not going to go through every element here, but you can see how with tokens you can easily put a lot of information into here automatically. Now, how do we then get this to a target system? How do we actually provision it? Well, the first thing we can do is output a migration plan. And this is essentially a bulk loader. But the difference is here, we can then start blending other data sources with it. So as well as the audit it's done from the PBX itself, we can then start saying, well, have they got an external voicemail? Well, we'll take an export from that and blend that in. If they've got a call recorder, well, we can blend that in as well. If we've got information from the edge switches, we can then see which phones are plugged in where. If we've got an out from AD, we can pre-populate it with all the details of the, which extension, which SIP account details need to be applied to each user. We can look at CDR data to see if they've made any calls since, in the last 3 months and highlight the users that haven't made any calls. We can do translations here. So we can say, anyone who has extension number 5 something 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 becomes, 0800 123 5 something something something, because most PBXs don't actually store the DDI information within them. They just have digit modification plans. We can tell it what we expect our extension lengths to be, so it'll highlight any errors that are there. We can also say, check to see which phones are supported if we wanted to. Remove any duplicate directory numbers because we may be blending multiple switches together. And there's various other translations we can do. Now, at this point, we can output this in our bulk loader format or in a bulk loader that's suitable for Broadworks, for Skype or Teams, for BT formats. So we can put it out in a number of bulk loader formats. I'll put it out in our standard one for the moment. And off it goes. And bang, it takes that long. So what we've got now is a bulk loader that on the front page tells us what we've exported. And then if I go to devices, for each device it's telling us what type of device it is, whether it's in service or not. This is actually our old phone system, so many of the devices were going out of service. The tenant, the name of the user, the model of the phone, MAC and IP address if it's available. We can see here it's blended in the AD information. We can see here where it's created the DDI number from the extension numbers. And here we've got the last time the phone was used. So we can now start saying, well, we can start looking at removing devices that aren't being used. Not only does it tell us how many calls in and out there were, it then breaks it out into geographic, international, mobile, non-geographic, and premium. It shows us class of services that are used, pickup group membership, call forwards, whether they've got voicemail, what all the keys are programmed, AD information, and then right at the end we have our snag list where it shows things like if there's a duplicate directory number or if MAC spoofing's been used. It's highlighted here because it was the only thing I asked it to check was if there's any devices with no usage. But it will also pick up things like users with, say, a Manchester number logged into Leeds, or if the extension number length is the wrong length, or if there's duplicate names. I mean, you're going to get duplicate names like meeting room and reception and things like that. But what it does is it gives you that sanity check. Does Fred Bloggs really need 10 phones? Highlights single members of hunt groups, pickup groups, which is pointless programming, and orphan profiles. We then break out analogs separately because they have to be dealt with separately. You remember I said there was 4, but it transpires those 4 are all voicemail ports. Well, we're not going to need those anymore. Now, if someone had just looked at the system and seen 4 analog extensions there, they might very well have costed in the requirement for some sort of analog gateway or FXO device. So we'll just save money there. In terms of hunt groups, we can say, well, we don't need to worry about all of them because they're all old voicemail hunt groups. We can remove all of those as well. We've got pickup groups, and then at the end it gives us our snag list. So it's shown us that actually, out of all of these, once we start removing spare phones and modems and test devices and hot desk users won't be needed anymore, more test devices and lab phones and voicemail ports, suddenly out of those 37 devices, there's probably only 10 that we'd want to keep. So we've just reduced the potential impact by, £30 per month per user, so £450 a year in terms of WebEx licensing or Teams licensing. So that gives us our bulk loader, and this is something that's reviewed with the customer. So, our channels like BT and that will take that and review it with the customer.